Good evening. We are very excited that you are all here tonight. My name is Katie, and I'm one of the assistant chaplains here. And on behalf of the chaplains, the staff, and the board, I am happy to welcome you here tonight. We are incredibly grateful for the opportunity to host Father Greg Boyle here tonight for the Faye Vincent Jr. Fellowship in Faith and Culture. Father Greg was born in Los Angeles, one of 8 children. He joined the Jesuits, and his ministry had him working with high school kids, Christian-based communities in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and chaplain of the penal colony in Mexico and Folsom Prison. In 1992, as a response to the civil unrest in Los Angeles, he launched his first business, Homeboy Bakery, with a mission to create an environment that provided training, work experience, and above all, the opportunity for rival gang members to work side by side. Today, Homeboy Industries nonprofit economic development enterprises include Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, and Homegirl Cafe. As the executive director of Homeboy Industries and an acknowledged expert on gangs and intervention approaches, Father Boyle speaks to students, teachers, social workers, criminal justice workers, and others about the importance of guidance and unconditional love in preventing youth from joining gangs. He and his homies were featured speakers at the White House Conference on Youth at the personal invitation of First Lady Bush. He was a member of the 10-person California delegation to President Clinton's Summit on Children in Philadelphia and has received numerous honorary degrees, accolades, and recognitions on behalf of Homeboy Industries for his work with former gang members. He's the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion, and stars in a documentary about his work, which we screened here last year called G-Dog. Homeboy Industries, now located in the heart of downtown Los Angeles, is recognized as the largest gang intervention and reentry program in the country and has become a national model. He truly lives the corporal works of mercy every day, and we are honored to welcome Father Greg here as our 2015 Vincent Fellow. Please join me in welcoming him.
So I've spoken to like 3 places already, venues. So I don't know if has anybody been at any of the other ones. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, you've been to about 8 of them now. Because I met you once before in Fairfield, so you're going to hear some of the same stuff. So how many of you saw that film? Okay, well, good. So all right. So I might repeat myself a little bit, but it's mainly. It happens, where you repeat yourself or people have heard you before, and it undoes me for some reason. If there's one person in the crowd, I'm glad you're hiding back there, who's heard me, That once I spoke at a foster grandparent gathering, a huge gathering in Southern California, and I had spoken at it the summer before, and for some reason, they invited me back 2 summers in a row, which was a head scratcher for me, and then afterwards, I ran into this old grandmother who I think liked the talk because she had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed both my hands and she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." So kind of hoping she misspoke there, but not entirely sure. So, I'm kind of chomping at the bit to get home. I'm homesick. Today made me all homesick all over the place. And it's the privilege of my life for 30 years to have worked with gang members, and I feel quite blessed to have been rescued and saved and liberated and educated and inspired by them. The day won't ever come when I have more courage or I am more noble or I'm closer to God than the folks that I text all day and talk to and rub shoulders with. Like a homie, Lewis, who's kind of runs the place while I'm not there. There's a kind of about 5 gang members who run the place along with some other folks. And Lewis is a kind of a force of nature, big, huge guy, had been a shot caller, gang member, locked up, tattooed, heroin addict, now solid in his own recovery, and he's done a lot of things at Homeboy. He's worked there for a number of years, but now he's starting to inhabit the practice of telling his own story, and he does a good job. And So we went out to dinner not long ago, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. And he said, you know, you have to pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. I said, yeah, no shit. Good advice there. So thank you for your attention coming out in the elements. These are elements in Los Angeles. They may not be for you. I'm wearing everything I own at the moment, so piled all my layers in Bob's office. So thank you for your attention. Folks on the margins are just hoping for a slice of it. I remember a 16-year-old very earnest gang member came and stood in front of my desk and he said, look, I need your divided attention. I said, well, you are in luck, because that's exactly what you will be getting from me today, as I'm texting and emailing all at the same time. So there's a vision that brings you to the great St. Thomas More Center here, a great community of faith that wants to refine the vision of what does it mean, really, to have the joy of the gospel somehow part of the air you breathe. The prophet Habakkuk writes, the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. But none of us want to wait too long, con los brazos cruzados, tapping our feet and staring at our watches. You want to make something happen. What is the thing that we hope to make happen? I want to suggest in the brief time I have with you, I'm going to yak and then we'll do Q&A. The whole thing we hope for is the creation of a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. This is God's dream come true. This is God's hope. Mother Teresa, I think, diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we, with God and with Jesus, imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? How do we dismantle the barriers that exclude? How do we inch our way out to where we need to stand, which is where Jesus stood, which is to say at the margins, with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear? How do we get that privileged moment to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away? I suspect that if a community of kinship happened to be our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. For no kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals, I think the truth of the matter is they can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we know we belong to each other. So the homies teach me everything of value, and I couldn't be more grateful to them. But in the last couple of years, they've taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful for that because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I don't know what we did before this, smoke signals, I suppose, but so I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So there I am in a car with two older vatos, Manuel and Poncho, older guys who tattooed, been to prison, do a variety of things for me. They're going to help me give a talk. So right after our morning meeting, which concludes at exactly 9, they get in the car, we drive to this high school. And Manuel's in the front seat, so he gets an incoming. And so he reads this text to himself, and he kind of chuckles. And I said, what is it? It's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I had just seen Snoopy. He was at morning meeting, gave me a big abrazo. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers, and it's actually a tougher job than you would think because occasionally gang members can be attitudinal. So I said, well, what's he say? Oh, gosh, hang on, it's dumb. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, the three of us, I'd never in my life, we died laughing, I almost swerved in oncoming traffic, And then I realized right at precisely that moment that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. I remember the days when they used to shoot at each other. And they used to shoot bullets at each other, and now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? Even in service, and everybody dedicates themselves to that, and it's a wonderful addition, probably, and I don't know how many years. It's probably not that old. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years, where that's part of any educational process, alternative spring breaks and that kind of thing. It's obviously a good thing. But service is where you start. It can't be where you end. Service is the hallway that'll eventually get you to the ballroom, and that's the place you want to end up in, the place of exquisite mutuality. Because there's a distance in service, service provider, service recipient. I've come to do you a service. At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all in need of healing. We're all a cry for help. It's one of the things that creates this sort of connective tissue that joins us together as members of the human family. But there's a distance in service, and you want to bridge even that. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend. And he was extraordinary in all the ways that we've come to believe that to be true. But he was about the best listener I've ever been in the presence of. If you were talking to him, nobody else existed. He was laser beam focused. He wasn't looking over his shoulder to see if somebody more important was on the approach. But famously, a reporter had commented to him once and said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, "The feeling's mutual." And that's the whole deal right there. How do we arrive at that place where there is no daylight that separates us? That's God's dream come true. I remember there was a homie, nobody found more job opportunities through Homeboy Industries than this guy we all called Dreamer. He grew up in Pico Gardens housing projects. I knew him since he was a little mocosito. And he got into trouble, got into a gang, in and out of being locked up. He's 40 now, I think, doing quite well. But, in his early 20s, he was something of a yo-yo, always in and out of being locked up. And I would find him a job in the private sector, but then he'd always kind of wander back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of. And then eventually he'd wander back to me again. And it was a pattern that was kind of happening a lot. And so this one time he had finished a 4-month stretch, probation violation in county jail, and then there he is sitting in front of me. A very smart kid, super smart, though I don't think school was ever really part of his past. But had one of the most dangerous senses of humor that I always enjoyed. And without fail, he could retrieve this. And so he's sitting there in front of me, and he says what gang members often say, "This time it'll be different." All right, so with him sitting there, I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, California. this guy had hired homies in the past. I think, maybe he'll do it again. Sure enough, he says, yeah, you tell him he can show up tomorrow morning. That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer begins work in the vending machine company. 2 weeks later, there he is again, sitting in front of my desk. I go, I can't even believe this. Hijo de Madre Santa, what's happening? But this time he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his very first paycheck at the vending machine company. He says, damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, just who? And he looked at me strange and he said, well, God, of course. Oh, yeah, no, that's right. That's right, that would be God right there. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one, yeah. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. Them Genesis days. He goes, yeah, because God would have been had struck down your ass already by now, he said. Well, all I remember was the two of us, we just sort of dissolved in laughter. We fell out of our chairs, and I defy you exactly to identify who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. It's mutual. So Homeboy Industries was born in 1988, during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. It had 8 gangs at war with each other, which is not typical of public housing to have that many gangs. Making it, according to the LAPD, the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. So in LA County, we have 1,100 gangs and 120,000 gang members. So if LA is the gang capital of the world, my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles, which I didn't know when I walked up there. So I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 198th 2 weeks ago. Not all from that community, of course, but because I run a large gang intervention program, I know a lot of gang members, and I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many junior high, middle school age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school, and nobody wanted them. So I walked out into the projects, and I kind of isolated each one and talked to them alone, which is the only way you can do this. And I said, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, they all said, yeah. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand. So across the street from the church is our elementary school, first 2 floors, the parochial school, K to 8. And an entire 3rd floor was the convent, and the nuns lived there on the whole 3rd floor, and had lived there for 50 years, I think. And so I gathered them in the living room, and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out? And we could turn the convent into, like a school for gang members. And they said, sure. I don't know what we'd do without nuns. And we found a place for them, and gang members came to the church in large numbers, not to mass, but to church property, because it was across the street from the church. And that upset the apple cart a little bit, because aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. And so that was a good gospel challenge, I think. And then they started to say, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the parish, we marched around the factories that surrounded the parish, trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. So we invented things. We did crews, different kind of crews. A crew that made up of enemies building our child care center,
graffiti removal, maintenance, and we had about 60 folks working, strategically hired gang members. Enemies working side by side, and we had the unrest in 1992 in Los Angeles after the Rodney King beating and the riots. And a movie producer read an article about how our community hadn't exploded, and maybe it was self-serving, but I said, I think it's because we have these 60 strategically hired gang members who are invested in their own community. And he liked that, and he summoned me, and he happened to have $500 million. And he said, what do you want me to do? I said, well, buy this old abandoned bakery across the street from the church. They have ovens. We'll put hairnets on enemy gang members, and I don't know, we'll call it Homeboy Bakery. That was the extent of my business plan, you know. And he said, like the nuns, sure. So we were off and running, and a month later we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market, which is a historic part of downtown LA. Once we had plural, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this. And not everything worked. You know, Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And then nobody ever intends to do something like this, but we backed our way, evolved our way into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the United States. And there are 46 programs in the country that have been modeled after Homeboy, and 11 outside the country. And all those programs form what we call the Global Homeboy Network, where we meet every August, where we compare notes. So 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to redirect their lives and find some transformation in the place. A lot of curricular things, just about anything you could imagine, from anger management to domestic violence, grief and loss, meditation, GED prep, driver training, prep. We still have a school that's packed with a waiting list, gang members, kids on probation. That's at another location now, at our old office actually. Free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. We have 3 laser machines, 1 paid physician assistant, and 47 volunteer doctors who come and give their time, 50,000 laser treatments a year. So if any of you are starting to regret that Y tattoo you have, no matter how big it is, just see me afterwards. And it all began because of a guy named Frank, who I'd never met. He wandered right out of Corcoran State Prison, and 2 days out of prison, he's sitting in front of me in my office, and tattooed on his forehead like a billboard, filling the whole space, and pardon my French, was "fuck the world." And he looked at me and he said, you know, I am having a hard time finding a job. I said, well, you know, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one, you know. And I think, you know, where do you send him for a job? You know, to McDonald's? Do you want fries with that? No, I don't want. Mothers clutching their kids, running out of the store. So I hired him, and he bagged bread for 2 years. And I found a doctor at White Memorial Hospital who gave me 1 hour a month to chip away at Frank's forehead and a few others. And before no time at all, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted the same service, so we couldn't stay with that arrangement. Parentheses, Frank is currently a security guard at a movie studio, and there is no trace left of the dumbest, angriest thing that he had ever done, proving once and for all that what Sister Helen Prejean says is quite right. Everybody's a whole lot more than the worst things they've ever done. And we have all our training programs, Homeboy, the solar panel installation training program, all our enterprises, Homeboy Diner, the only place you can buy food at LA's City Hall. If you ever fly into LAX and American Airlines is your carrier, we have a restaurant in Terminal 4. We have a thing called Homeboy Grocery where we sell chips and salsas in all the Ralph's supermarkets in California. Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise where we sell our logo stuff online and our retail store. Homeboy Silkscreen where we, that's been around for 20 years. Homeboy Bakery is thriving. Homeboy Lunch Truck, which is like 5 months old now, doing very well. Farmers markets, we're in about 42 where we sell our wares. Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater. It's become something of a famous place. I mean, you can go there, it's only breakfast and lunch. And there's always somebody there, a celeb, a movie star. Jim Carrey was there some time ago. And Jack Black and his wife were there last week. I didn't see him, but he took selfies with everybody. About a month ago, we got only a 2-hour notice, a phone call from the Secret Service to say that Vice President Joe Biden was going to stop by for lunch, and so his motorcade arrived. And I wasn't there, I was on retreat, and so one of the homies had given him my card, and so there I have on my voicemail message on my cell phone, "Hey, Father Boyle, it's Joe Biden here." You know, it's like, excuse me? And he left this message, and wow, where's Homeboy Industries been all my life? I mean, just effusive and old shoe and great-hearted, and then he said, I tell everybody the only reason I stay a Catholic is because of the Jesuits and nuns, you know. I said, me too. So, but when I finally came to the office after my 8-day annual retreat, I see this guy Louie, and Louie says to me, "While you were gone, we were visited by an MVP." I go, "Do you mean a VIP?" "Yeah, that one, VIP." Damn, do you imagine? Here at Homeboy Industries, we were visited by the Vice President of the United States, Mick Romney. Honest to God, that's what he thought. And it wasn't Mitt, it was Mick. And I said, well, no, actually it was Joe Biden. And he, honest to God, thought that, first of all white people look alike. And then he figured that if Barack Obama won, then shouldn't naturally the guy who got the next most votes should become vice president. And I think we should try this. And it can't get any worse. So, but I digress. Oh, so we had Diane Keaton show up for lunch once. She of Annie Hall fame and Godfather movies, big movie star. She's there with a guy who's there once a week. And her waitress this day is Glenda, and Glenda's a big girl. Been to prison, tattooed. You don't want to mess with Glenda. Felon, parolee. She has not even a single clue who Diane Keaton is. So she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 platillos that she particularly likes, and then Diane Keaton says, oh, I'll have that second one. That one sounds good. And then for some reason, something dawns on Glenda at exactly that moment. She says, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to sort of deflect it humbly. Oh, gosh, I suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. Oh my gosh, that just took my breath away, you know. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. So Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind. And we need go no further really than to hear Jesus speak to the gathered when he says pretty clearly that you may be one. I suppose he could have chosen to be more self-referential, but he actually, in my humble opinion, is that he doesn't want it to be about himself. He wants it to be about us. in much the same way as the covenant that we kind of read about in the first reading today. The covenant is not about, as I have loved you, please love me back. That's what I would say if I were God. God says, no, as I have loved you, so must you have a special love for the poor and the orphan and the widow and the stranger. He could have been more self-referential, but it's really about us and about our own sense of kinship, which in the end is God's dream come true. So all of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, called enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. I don't believe that we're really meant to hold the bar up and ask people to measure up. We're just supposed to show up and hold the mirror up and tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth and my truth is a gang member's truth, and it all happens to be the same truth. And here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks on the margins as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. And honest to God, no bullet can pierce that. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But it's part of what we do at Homeboy often enough is you have to reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that keep people from seeing their truth. Another late great person, Marcus Borg, said that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout Scripture is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. I invite you to take a leisurely stroll through the Acts of the Apostles. If you do, you will find not just a quaint snapshot of life in the earliest Christian community. You're going to, in fact, find a measure of health in any community at all, including this one. Things will leap off the page. Things like see how they love one another, which is an excellent way to measure. Or there's nobody needy in this community, a perfect metric. But my favorite one is an odd one, and it says simply, and awe came upon everyone. It would seem that the measure of our health may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So some years ago now, I was invited to speak to a bunch of social workers, 600 of them in Richmond, Virginia, and sometimes I don't read the invitations all that carefully. I'll say yes, and then I'll read months later, what is that again? And so, I figure it's a keynote. Maybe I'll open the conference or close the conference. Well, I see the thing to my horror. It's a gang in service, 9 to 5. I am to be the only speaker. So I frantically call 2 homies in, Andre and Jose, and I say, look, you're coming with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time, because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose got up. He was 25 years old, and you know, he started like everybody does in our 18-month program in the humble place, which is every 3 months everybody has to clean urinals and bathrooms and stuff. And then they move up. Well, he had moved his way through a lot of places, but he ended up as a valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. Of course, a gang member, tattooed, been to prison, but he also had a long stretch as a heroin addict and an even longer stretch as a homeless man. So he gets up in kind of an offhanded way. He says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers gasped, And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. He said to them, and we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. He said, I guess I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. And she walked me up to an orphanage and she knocked on the door. And when the guy answered the door, she said, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me. And my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking. He couldn't really carry on. He was so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could speak, he said, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. And so we figure out a way in our own particularity to inch ourselves out to the margins. And if you look under your feet, the margins are getting erased only because you've chosen to stand there. And that Jesus is little concerned about what position you take on this or that, and is more concerned about where you've chosen to position yourself. And you brace yourself because the world will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And so we choose to make those voices heard. I'm just going to close with one story that's sort of on my mind lately. A woman, I was interviewed on the Christian Broadcasting Network by a nicely coiffed Christian lady. And I was given a litany of all the things that we do at Homeboy, and as I gave the litany to you. And at the end, she kind of made a face like she smelled something foul, and she said, yeah, but how much time do you spend each day, praising God? I said, all damn day. Let me just say she didn't like that answer very much. But it begs this question, which I've been thinking about, what kind of praise is of any interest to God? I think our God is self-effacing. He's more interested in us than desirous that we will just stare at him. He's more interested in the kinship that he longs for some years ago, my alma mater, Gonzaga University in Spokane, forced their freshmen against their will to read my book. And so I'm not complaining, but they said, would you come up here and could you bring 2 homies with you? So I always pick homies who are enemies. These are my 2 criteria. If they're enemies, so that I can throw them in a hotel room just to mess with them a little bit, you know. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the sheer thrill of seeing them terrified in the air, you know. And so I brought 2 guys, Bobby, African-American gang member, worked in the bakery, and Mario, who at the time worked in our merchandise store. I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, men and women, and I've never in my life brought anybody more terrified than Mario. He was just hyperventilating, you know, and we hadn't even gotten on the plane yet, you know. So we were flying out of Burbank, and Burbank's a little tiny thing if you've ever been there, and big bay windows, and they have no hermetically sealed chutes. You got to walk out the door on the tarmac like you're the President of the United States, walk up those steps, you know. And there's the front steps and the back steps. So I'm sitting there with Mario, and our plane arrives. It's early morning, and I go, that's the plane we're going to get on. And honest to God, I'm thinking he might well die before we hit those steps. So at one point, the 2 flight attendants who are in our early morning crew, females, they both have really large cups of Starbucks, and they're schlepping up the front steps, and Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, well, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now, you know. All right, I probably shouldn't have said that, you know. But I should tell you that Mario is about the most tattooed individual who's ever worked at Homeboy, which, trust me, is saying a lot. I mean, he's all sleeved out, and his neck, and his whole face, except for kind of a little circle where this is, you know, but everything is covered in tattoos, and I'd never been in public with him. And we were walking through the Burbank airport, and people are doing this, you know, and mothers are clutching kids a little more closely. And I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting that they would react that way, because if you went today, and he works selling the bread, baked goods, if you went today, asked any person at Homeboy, who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works here, trust me, they're not going to say me. They're going to say Mario. Just so kind, so gentle, even as terrified as he was on that plane. You know, when the flight attendant handed him peanuts, you know, he didn't just take them, and he didn't just thank her. He grabbed her hand and looked her in the eye and, thank you so much. It's like way over the top, you know. So we get to Gonzaga, and it happens at some educational institutions where they have one main talk and that they've told you about, and then there are 93 other talks that they haven't told you about. And so you're going to this class, this lunch, this class, this lunch. And so we had all those things, and I told Mario and Bobby, I said, look, I'm not going to talk at any of them. I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. You get up and talk. Well, they were nervous, especially Mario. He was kind of really panicky. But they got up and told their stories, and their stories were stories of abandonment and neglect and torture and terror and violence. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. So I was overwhelmed with this throughout the day, and I said, look, I have my 45 minutes I'm going to say to these folks, but I want you to get up and each do 5 minutes, a little snapshot, so that I can include you in the question and answer. And they were terrified, but they did a good job. There were 2,000 people there gathered. They really got people out, and it was this huge venue, 2,000 standing room only. Kids were sitting on the floor. And I did my thing, and they did their thing, and I go, okay, questions. And a woman stands, and she says, yeah, I have a question. It's for Mario. First question out of the gate is for Mario. So he's a tall drink of water, and he walks up and, yes, and he's just terrified. And well, you say you're a father and how you have a daughter and a son who are kind of entering their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario, he just kind of gets a hernia trying to come up with the right answer. And he closes his eyes and you can see he's straining, but he really wants to get the right answer. When suddenly he blurts, as soon as he says those two words, he retreats back into his closed eyes strain. And you can tell he's losing this battle with tears and he's trembling, but he wants to get the sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And the room is silent until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. And she says, "Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you." And 2,000 total strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that a room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And I think that's the only praise God has any interest in. It's mutual, that you may be one. I think it's the only thing God cares about. And so we stand at the margins and we hope for the best, but we're confident that because Jesus stood at the margins and they got erased because he did, we want to do the same thing. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we wait for it. Thank you very much. So, only 10 minutes, and I will keep us to that. And so we'll try something radically different. You go like this, I'll go like that. I know you don't do that in classes here. I don't know what you do. You just belt it out, I guess. If you're meek and mild. Yes, sir.
You do a lot of work with people who work with each other. How do you make out in LA with the police force?
It was, I've been doing this for like 30 years, and so the first 10 years was really quite hostile, mainly from law enforcement. It's funny, death threats, bomb threats, hate mail, but the hate mail all came, the people sometimes when I said that I would say that and people go, "Oh, gang members hated you." Okay, no, never. Obviously, Homeboy represents hope to them. It represents an exit ramp off this violent, crazy freeway. But if a gang member is the demonized other, then it's a short hop to demonize me for helping them. So cops were in the business in those days, and now they're doing it more undercover. And certainly the leadership now wouldn't agree with the demonizing that took place 25 years ago. But the hate mail was almost all from law enforcement. Anonymous, "I'm an LAPD officer, I hate you, you're part of the problem. Here we're trying to fix this and you're getting in the way," kind of thing. Lots of those, which was odd. So I think we're better, because people presume it's a crime issue, and I don't believe that it is. I think gang violence is essentially a community health issue, not a public health issue. There's a difference there. I think that's a bad analysis to think that it's violence as contagion. It's a community health issue. It requires things that law enforcement can't do. So people who insist on it being a crime issue, and they'll ask me, how do you work with law enforcement? Because they think that it's their purview. And I go, if somebody is acting crazy, we call the cops, and somebody comes and gets them. Kind of a 5150 situation. But other than that, we don't work with police. Why would we work with police? You know, we're a gang rehab in much the same way that a drug rehab deals with folks who are addicted. But we're decidedly an intervention program. We're not a prevention program. We don't deal with kids to talk them out of getting into gangs. I hope. Often I'm at a talk and someone, well, what are you doing about prevention? I'll go, not a damn thing. What are you doing about prevention? You know, somebody should do it. But you know, we got our hands full. We deal with folks ages 14 to 60 who got into a gang, and now what do you do? A lot of them released from prison and stuff. Yeah.
How do you handle those? I'm sure there are many who have chronic psychiatric issues but can still be in the community.
Yeah, that's a tough one for us because we have to, there are 3 profiles of kids who join gangs. You know, they're not 8, not 5, they're only 3. The baseline is the kid who is unable to imagine a future for himself, a kid who's stuck in a despair that's quite bleak, because this is about a lethal absence of hope primarily. The second profile, the kid who joins a gang, or likewise the gang member who comes to us for help, they all fit the same 3 profiles, is the damaged or traumatized a kid who can't see his way clear to transform his pain, so he keeps transmitting it. And then the third category is the mentally ill kid. So it's on a continuum of severity. Some folks are more mentally ill or have mental health issues than are despondent or traumatized, but it's usually a combo burger of all 3. We talk about this as staff because there are times when we go, wow, this guy's going to be too hard for us. We'll normally take that kid, but you wouldn't want 10 of them, you know what I mean? Because you have to be attentive to the whole place. But we have psychiatrists, we have meds, we believe in meds, you know, because for the folks who are dual diagnosis, you know, need to be in recovery, they need to take something to float their boat so they don't get so overwhelmed. But it's a struggle, as people know. They'll spiral into a refusal, then they'll self-medicate, and then we're off to the races, and law enforcement is dealing with them. But it's funny, you know, therapy was in my early years, it was clear that you're dealing with uniformly and unanimously tortured and damaged and traumatized folks, and it would help if they talked to somebody. But they refused. My first 10 years, no homie wanted to do that, not group. I'm not going to tell people out, you know, and they just didn't talk about it. And then, you know, there are turning points that are quite glorious, you know. Once he texted me today, I hadn't heard from him a long time, a kid named Gumby. And he called me and he said, can you come get me at the emergency room? So I picked him up and to drive him home. And I said, what happened? Well, he describes basically a anxiety attack. I don't know what the doctor at the ER told him, but I figured, well, I'll try it again. You know, I said, you know, it might help you if you talk to somebody. Oh, you mean like analyze this? That was his reference point. The dumb movie with Billy Crystal and Robert De Niro. Yeah, like analyze this. I swear to you, that was the first time of 35 moments where people went, oh, like analyze this. That movie did quite a lot of good, actually. Because somehow and then you're in a tipping point. And then suddenly it's completely acceptable now. So if somebody were to say, well, it's kind of a stigmatized thing and kids aren't, nope, not at Homeboy. Everybody's in therapy. All you need is a hook, and all you need is that moment where suddenly it just goes, whoom, and then you can't go back, I don't think. It would be impossible for this population, I think, to return to a place of stigma, and that's really good news. And that's why we have 5 paid therapists, but we have 43 volunteer therapists in a program we call Homeboy Heals. And a lot of our psychiatrists who give meds are part of that group. So it's a wonderful thing because they really deal with unspeakable things that happen to them. You know, women are harder, you know, gang members, and they represent maybe 3 to 5% of the overall gang population. But every single one has been sexually abused. Every single one. There's not an exception. And my guess is that the guys have probably more than anybody knows. That would be my guess. And so it kind of stands to reason that they got locked in a place of real darkness and trauma and damage. And yes, ma'am.
So when you refer to your homies,
Mm-hmm.
you call them gang members rather than former gang members. And I'm
Oh,
wondering,
former gang members? Yeah.
So I'm wondering, one, if they like still maintain ties to their gangs, and also if they don't, how you work through that transition with them. Because based on the three profiles, I'd imagine that the gangs do provide some form of nourishment, even if it's not like the optimal nourishment. And so how do you like transition them out of that kind of community that they found?
Well, because it's a false community. You know, you ask any homie, as I do every time a homie wants to be in our program, name one good thing that came into your life because of your neighborhood, your gang. And they know that the answer is nothing. And they don't say that answer because it's the answer I want. It's because that's the answer. Once a kid said to me, the only time I've ever, thousands and thousands of times of posing that question, he looked at me with the most unbearable sadness. And he said, well, my gang made me who I am. I said, no, it's kept you from who you are. And that's the truth. So the outsider view takes in all sorts of things and wants to rationally figure out, why did this happen? I was with a reporter recently who said, well, of course, everybody knows that kids join gangs because they just want to belong. I said, no. And she goes, well, everybody knows that, like it's a Geico commercial, you know? And I said, no, you know, kids join Little League because they want to belong. They join a gang because they want to die. And the difference between Homeboy Industries and the gang is, Homeboy Industries is a belonging that will lead to becoming. But a gang keeps you from becoming. You get stuck there. And there's a presumption that they must be drawn to it, lured to it, attracted to it. Join a gang, see the world, wine, women, and song. That's what I want. And gang members themselves will talk that way, only because it's too hard to say, my mom used to put cigarettes out in me, or hold my head in the toilet and flush till I nearly drowned. That's too hard to say. So I say wine, women, and song, and money and fast cars. That's what they'll say. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. They're all fleeing something. And so everything is utterly dependent on our diagnosis. If our diagnosis is bad, how can a bad diagnosis lead to a good treatment plan? And so to the extent that we can stand in awe at what these folks have had to carry rather than judgment, then we recognize their behavior as a language of the despondent and the damaged and the mentally unwell. And you stand at the margins, you hope against hope, and you brace yourself, because who isn't going to accuse you of wasting your time? But in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. So we go from this place tonight in our own way, in our own particularity, to make those voices heard. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for those words. I think tonight we're all a little bit in awe, like those early apostles. You're all invited to continue the conversation at reception in the dining hall right after this.